Hey everyone, and welcome back to Identity Architects, the podcast that spotlights individuals who are changing the way that data is used to deliver better customer experiences. I'm your host, Ben Cicchetti, and for this episode, our VP of Sales, Stu Colman, is back, and this time he's sitting down with Karen Eccles, Senior Director of Commercial Innovation at the Telegraph. During this session, Stu and Karen discuss the challenges publishers are facing with the loss of third-party cookies, how the Telegraph is going to use the extra time provided by Google, the role of replacement identifiers, and their first-party data solution powered by InfoSum, Unity. Before I hand over to Stu, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button wherever you enjoy podcasts. But now, without any further delay, let's jump into their conversation.
Great, and welcome everybody to the Identity Architects podcast. I'm joined today by Karen from the Telegraph. Really pleased that Karen's joining us today. Karen's one of those people I've known for some time. It's always a joy speaking to her. Her knowledge is great. I always learn when I'm speaking to her. So I'm really pleased that she's here and we get to ask her a bunch of questions and kind of get some of that knowledge out of her brain to share with you all. Karen, I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself to start with.
Hi, thanks so much, Stu, for asking me to join. And hi, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here and slightly worried about that knowledge and whether I've actually got any and whether I'm going to speak it today. But let's see. I'll do the best I can. My name is Karen Eccles, and I am the Senior Director of Commercial Innovation at the Telegraph. So if anyone doesn't know the Telegraph, it's a very long established, over 160-year-old British news brand. And I joined the Telegraph around 4 years ago at that time to be a digital sales director. But at the same time, the Telegraph was embarking on a subscriptions first strategy. So quite quickly, my job became, what do we do when we're not an advertising scale model and when the advertising needs to supplement a subscription strategy? So my job's been all about building the products, the narrative, and the measurement that fits beneath a sub-strategy. And I've still got the innovation team who have been building that with me, plus all of our commercial digital team work with me as well.
Brilliant. So super busy then.
Kind of ish, yes. There's always something to do, something to worry about always.
Definitely. Good. Well, I'm really looking forward to kind of getting into that bit with you as we kind of go through. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of what's going on at the moment around this kind of cookieless future and some of the challenges that exist and some of the opportunities that are coming out of that. And we'll talk a bit about that. I want to talk to you a little bit about how brands and media owners and their relationship might evolve over the coming few months and couple of years as we kind of move to this kind of first party driven world. I'm definitely going to ask you about Telegraph Unity, which I know you'll be keen to talk about as we kind of work through this. But let's start right at the beginning with what's going on around this kind of cookieless future and this kind of all-encompassing statement around the way the world is evolving. There's a lot of companies out there kind of pushing solutions and pushing ways of working without third-party cookies, whether that be universal IDs or whether that be the use of first-party data in clean rooms or other forms of creating connectivity. Keen to get your thoughts on that space generally, and specifically, do you think we'll end up in a world where there might be one or two solutions, or are we going to end up with a smorgasbord of ways of working in the space?
It's a lovely, tiny question to start with, Steve.
Sorry, we might as well start where we're going to go. So
let's start there. So I think just putting in context, starting from what I know, which is the Telegraph and how we've been approaching this, because we started the subs strategy and started thinking about everything in terms of engagement and logged in users rather than scale and passerby traffic.
Yep.
We were kind of forced to start thinking about this quite early on. So, around about 2.5 years ago, which didn't feel early on and clever 2.5 years ago. It felt quite scary. And,
what are we doing? We're going crazy.
At some point, like, oh my God, what's happening? But it meant that we had to think about, some monetizing our assets as a publisher and what would we have in the future. And that was, logged in users and engagement and time spent and those kind of things rather than an ad model built on scale and impressions. So we've had quite a lot of time to think about this and really to conclude that the current model doesn't work for advertisers and it doesn't work for publishers, and it really, rewards the wrong things. So it encourages content makers, which I think are different to publishers, to try to just game as big numbers of impressions as possible, in order to drive revenues. And this ecosystem has built up, and third-party data and third-party cookies have fueled it, where we've ended up with this crazy place where advertisers are spending so much money on sort of, it feels a bit like punching yourself in the face, kind of fighting the system that you're investing in.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to invest in that system via the open marketplace, for example, then you have to also spend so much money on, policing it and making sure it's safe and human and all of those things.
Yep.
So my hope is that we use this point in time now to redefine the direction that the industry had gone in. And we have a sort of once in a generation chance, I think, to rewrite things. So for me, it would be a real shame if we took this opportunity and just tried to replace the third party cookie with an alternative solution that does the same thing. So I'd hope that we end up with the smorgasbord approach with a variety of approaches, but mainly something that works better than cookies, because we're talking about the demise of a cookie as if it's a wonderful and flawless thing, which it really isn't. It's not a perfect solution as it is. It's less than robust. We don't always know where the data comes from. It's often out of date, and it's based on a piece of code, not people. And not necessarily their current behaviour. So, for us, we think if we can take stock now as an industry and think about how we'd like it to work in the future, rather than repeating something that we think has been quite flawed from the past, then that would be a result.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I actually read an article yesterday that said one of the challenges historically of the industry is we focused on control of data rather than trust within data. And I do think companies like Telegraph and the ways that you're looking to work, I think a really important part of that evolution could be that we get to build some of that trust, whether that's trust between media owners or content creators or entities that talk to consumers and the consumers, or whether that's between companies that are operating in that space. Building that trust into data usage, I think, could be a really good outcome from all of this. But I guess we'll see, won't we? But it seems to be an important part of it.
We will. That's interesting. We've been talking about trust and purpose a lot, and it's so important, that trust. It's not just trust about use of people's data, but also their trust in what's written and why, and is it regulated, and is it true or false, is it fake,
Yep.
Is it there just so that it can harvest impression and sell it cheap, or is it actually fact checked, is it true? All of these things are so important, and the digital advertising world is funding or not funding all of that content that exists.
Yeah.
A lot of the time it's there just so that advertising revenues can be made off the back of it. So I think it's really important that we build that trust up again, and also that we just try and do the right thing.
Absolutely. And talking about trust, let's talk about Google. Obviously, we seem to be using this deprecation of the third-party cookie, Google's deprecation of the third-party cookie, as the catalyst for that change. And they've just delayed that. How long for remains to be seen. I think they've set a date sometime in 2023, but that could move up or down, and we don't really know. But it'd be good to get a sense from you. I guess we've got a little bit of extra time now to kind of think through and work through the right approaches and make sure that the answer that we have coming out the other side is robust. So how do you kind of plan on using that kind of additional time? Is there anything that you're going to do differently, or you're all kind of full steam ahead with the current approaches? And I guess a question that talking to the industry in general is there a concern or a fear that others, whether they be other media owners or other technology companies, will just kind of stick their head in the sand and use up that additional time doing exactly what they do right now? Probably.
Oh gosh, let's hope not, but it sounds entirely likely, I think. So I think, again, because we had to, we were sort of in a position where we had to think about all of this stuff quite early. We were looking at the difference in our average yields across the browsers. So Apple had already introduced its ITP 2.3 in September 19, I think, which seems like a really long time ago now, but relatively isn't, I guess. And at that point, we could see a big difference in the value of our yield on Chrome versus on Safari, for example. And it was really interesting because as publishers, you don't normally see the value of of what the ecosystem knows about your inventory and the data that can be attached to it and monetized. So it gave us an idea of that kind of delta between the value of inventory that was having third-party data applied and where it wasn't on Safari, and it was fairly big. It was 40 to 50% back then, and that was a couple of years ago.
Yep.
So in some ways, when the Google made their announcement, for us it couldn't come quick enough that we could start working to do something differently and to rebuild, because this is an issue that does need to be fixed urgently, and we feel ready. And delaying just prolongs this sort of decaying system that doesn't sufficiently value privacy or premium publisher environments. But on the other hand, I really think it is only the most advanced and the really early adopting brands that are ready. And even for some of them, because as big corporate companies, they've got to go through so much in terms of InfoSec and compliance and their own kind of legal systems. Even if they're moving quickly, it takes them a long time to be ready. So I suppose for that reason, it's a good thing. And I think it gives the brands that weren't early adopters, who are going to be slower, we kind of had this false start. Yep. Where I think everybody has given it their attention now. I don't think it's something that's not on people's radars that they've not heard about, but they've got hopefully a year or two, if they start acting now, to be ready in time. So I feel like there are brands that we're talking to put their foot off the gas, but most of them, once they've started on this journey, I think they're continuing it. And maybe if anything, they don't feel compelled to sign up to a proxy solution because they feel like something's going to drop. It's like Y2K again. Something's going to drop off the end of a cliff at the end of this year. So they're not forced to make a decision that they might otherwise not make. But we definitely think there's still a sense of urgency because it's going to take a long time to get the right systems and legals in place for big advertisers.
So arguably Google have perhaps done us a favour, or done the industry a favour by forcing us into the journey and starting the journey, and then giving us, having forced us into it, a bit of time to actually do it properly and approach it with less kind of immediate pressure and make it more of a long-term move, I guess. I guess that could be one view of it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. As long as I think the sense of urgency needs to prevail, because there's so much that we all need to sort out. There's so many, tests and fails that we need to do to learn. And you want clients engaging with that now, really, rather than waiting till, the dot of midnight in a couple of years' time.
Absolutely. So on that theme, and obviously I billed you at the start as being the font of all knowledge when it comes to the world of publishing. So here's your time to shine. If there were 3 things that you would recommend to any publisher they should be doing in the next 18 months, what would those 3 things be?
I think it's only from my perspective.
Sorry, I should caveat that with obviously one of them is work with InfoSum. Sorry, I should say that at the start.
That's a given, obviously. Do I still get 3 on top of that?
No, you 3 more.
So first of all, I'd say build your logged in user base and focus on engaged audiences and not passerby traffic. So advertising is and will continue to be a really important revenue source for publishers.
Yep.
But it's super important that rather than devaluing inventory and trying to get into a race for scale, that honestly we're just not going to win, and the gap between the scale in publishing and scale in platforms is only going to widen. So what we have is we have audiences that love and trust and connect to our editorial. So knowing who those audiences are, but most importantly, making sure that those audiences are coming back and they're logging in regularly so that we understand what they read, what they care about. Yep. That's really important. Gathering registrations or newsletter sign-ups just for their own sake isn't the same thing. It's no good if you get an email sign-up, but you don't see that person come back, within 3 months. So the regular kind of logged in base is first absolute key, I think. And from there are so many other, kind of products that you can build out, including with InfoSum, of course. And then secondly, which is kind of linked to that, is diversifying revenue, especially outside the open marketplace. So I think any publishers who have a high percentage of their commercial revenue coming from the open marketplace, or a high percentage of their ad revenue coming there, need to look and see how they can diversify and reopen up direct conversations with brands, and make sure they're valuing their inventory in the right way. So, that might mean reducing the amount of advertising on site and thinking about the kind of formats and whether they fit the environment, but really building out an ad proposition that works for you as a publisher rather than to serve the demand of the OMP, because the current system and the yields in that system are only going to go in one direction, I think, which is it's downwards. And then my third one would be to put a really high value on your customer, the relationship with your customer or readers, and understanding how effective it is if brands can tap into that you don't compare it with open marketplace inventory, for example. You don't actually need that kind of scale. So put a really high value on it, and I don't mean just 10 or 20% more valuable. It's several times more valuable, and then guard that data and your customers' privacy fiercely, because that relationship, I believe, belongs to the reader, the customer, and to the publisher, and no one else. So a publisher needs to be very aware of anything they're entering into that's using their customer data, making sure it's not leaking, making sure that trust is very much safeguarded, and then making sure that anything you do off the back of that doesn't rely on scale but relies on effectiveness, and that's where the value comes from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Does that make sense? I feel like I might have said that backwards.
No, it makes perfect sense. And that last point I think is really, really important. If you look at some of the kind of movement around the industry, particularly things like the ICO calling out the amount of data that flows through a programmatic, kind of open programmatic world, and that being an issue, we talk a lot at InfoSum about what we call this trust triangle, essentially saying you've got trust that exists between the media owner and the brand, trust that exists between the brand and the consumer, and trust that exists between the consumer and the media owner. And they kind of connect on this triangle. And unless all three parties are happy and feel like their trust is being respected or is established, it's going to fall down. And I would agree wholeheartedly with you on that last point, which is some of the ways of working historically have broken that trust triangle. Yeah. And that's caused some of the kind of holes that we've ended up in, I guess.
Yeah, I agree completely. We talk about something similar, or think about it in a similar way, which is that in the transaction that includes identity, there are only three parties, and that is the reader, or the person, the human at the center of it, the publishing brand, and the advertiser, if they get that right. Yep. And nobody else should be profiting from that relationship, and it needs to have equal value for everyone, and the customer needs to understand what the value is that they're getting, whether it's fantastic content that they don't have to pay 5 times the subscription for because it's kind of co-funded by advertising, but that all needs to be really clear. And ad technology doesn't feature in that triangle. It needs to enable it to work, but shouldn't be profiting somewhere on the side out of that. So I think that's the thing we need to correct.
Yeah, absolutely. Moving on to the next question, but building on that a bit, one of the kind of, I guess, ways of looking at it is to say that historically the role of technology companies within that mix, and that's a very broad spectrum of companies involved in the monetization of advertising. There's been a lot of control in that space, and really that probably needs to move to a role of facilitation rather than control. Yeah. Because, as you right say, the control and the trust should sit with those three entities. That probably, therefore, would see brands and media owners perhaps coming closer together and working more collaboratively together and having a more direct relationship. Just keen to get your thoughts on how you think that might evolve over the next kind of 18, 24 months, how you might engage more directly with brands, how the role of first-party data might help shape some of those discussions.
Yeah, that's a really interesting area, and we've been thinking a lot more about this. I mean, agencies are incredibly important. I've got a team of great people who rep all of the major agencies, but we're increasingly talking. It's a 3-way conversation with the advertiser as well, and often direct with the advertiser about understanding their customer base. Yep. So I think the way that we'll see it evolve is working together with advertisers, and this is where I'd like it to go, so that we can start understanding our mutual customers together. So if you think about the Telegraph as an example publisher, our readers, if they're subscribing, if they're paying subscribers and that they're spending time every day logged into the Telegraph, they are our customers, and really we're a customer business rather than a media business in that sense. And if we can use technology like InfoSum, for example, to work with brand to understand our mutual customers together, it means that we can start thinking about our partnership with that brand rather than them briefing us and it being about ad targeting or producing content that matches a client's brief. It's about us seeing how we can augment their understanding of their own customers. So what do we know about their customers' passion points, their habits, their lean-in moments, when they spend the most time, when they, kind of are triggered to sort of go on an onward journey or kind of read more articles, and then write a brief together based on that mutual audience's passion points. And there, I think from there we can start building proper partnerships with brands that are based on what their customers really care about when they're on the Telegraph, and that's got to be better than any brief that's generic that is sent out to a kind of a wide group of media owners. And of course, we're partners in the Ozone project, so for all programmatic, we have the ability for advertisers to buy via a platform across all of the Ozone publishers.
Yep.
So that option of the programmatic activation is still there. But I think what's interesting for me is the direct conversations that we're having with brands and how we can change their understanding of their customers and the kind of activity that they book with us direct.
Yeah, I agree again wholeheartedly with that. I think this isn't about replacing technology companies. This isn't about replacing agencies. Their role and their value is still very significant, but it does create, as you're suggesting, opportunity to have a broader or more partnership-led discussion with a brand where you're actually creating value not just from showing an ad. It's about knowledge, it's about learning, it's about enrichment, it's about environment and creating opportunities to engage that extend beyond the kind of the standard ads. And I think that can only be a really positive thing. I can't see any negative in that at all.
No,
and I think Telegraph in particular is in a really fortunate position of having a great editorial environment, a trusted environment, a loyal readership base, and you were early to the party in terms of kind of capturing that information and subscribers and registered users. So I think definitely a bright future ahead for everything you're doing. On that, just kind of playing on that theme and also the theme a little bit of kind of how you build trust with your consumers. If I'm a Telegraph reader, if you were to stop me in the street and we would have a conversation about my data, how would you kind of explain to a customer Telegraph how that data is used, why it kind of creates that kind of better customer experience, why it's an important part of the relationship that you have with them?
I think I'm a terrible person to answer this question because I've never been able to explain to my mum what I do. So I'm going to give it a go.
It's just ads.
What on earth is it? Like, I don't know. So to be clear, I'm not the owner of Telegraph customer data or how we use it for editorial development, but I can give it a go. Yep. So I think the first thing is that we think about our customers in sets of like-minded people who we try to understand. So we don't think of it in terms of kind of stalky, sort of one-to-one or hyper-personalized targeting. It's more about segments and cohorts of people. Yep. And understanding what interested them and how they behave. So in terms of those segments and cohorts, we want to know what they want to read more of, what makes them decide to subscribe, obviously, because that's our, kind of mainly how we're funded. What makes them want to come back once they subscribe? What makes that subscription valuable to them? Why would they spend more time? What do they want to see? Kind of how their onward journeys unfurl, what recommendations are right for them. And if we weren't able to use data to make some of those decisions, then either the website or app would be harder for them to navigate to what they really want to read, or we would either be sending them a bunch of newsletters and emails, for example, that aren't relevant to them, or we'd be sending them none, and they'd be missing out on things that they really want to know about.
Yep.
So kind of that understanding just enables us to, and it's not, I think the key is it's not hyper personalized, and I don't necessarily think it should be. But it just enables us to give them, more of what they want. Bearing in mind that news brands now publish a huge amount per day on so many different platforms, that it'd be really hard for somebody to come into that and find, what they really want to spend time with, what they really want to read, without any, use of data to kind of put recommendations in front of them. So all of that helps inform the editorial team's understanding of what direction to go and what type of content and how it's presented.
Yep.
And then I suppose the other side of that is that we are a subscriber brand, but without advertising, we'd need to charge this person that I've imaginarily stopped in the street. We need to charge them more per subscription, or we'd have to dilute the Telegraph's content so that we could reach way more paying subscribers. So supplementing our revenue with advertising and using data enables us to build segments based on people's interests so that we can serve them the right ad. And again, without being able to do that, we would have to have a model where we have 8 competing ads per page, all of them hoping that they might be relevant and but really disrupting the user experience.
Yep.
So we use data to be able to deliver a better user experience, but one that supplements their subscription as well, and allows us to charge them a more reasonable price point.
Yeah.
All of this with the disclaimer that I'm not in charge of describing the use of data.
Always got to start with a disclaimer, but I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think you do yourself a disservice when you say you can't explain it. I think if you did have a conversation on the street with someone, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's about creating individual value, about creating individual kind of knowledge within their relationship with you, and I think that's a positive thing. And I think most people, in a reasoned discussion, would take that on board. If that's built on top of all the stuff you've already spoken about creating trust, about respecting privacy, about establishing a way of working that puts the consumer at the heart of it, I think that story is a good story, and I think we should be telling more of it. So no, I think it's a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd love to know a bit more about Telegraph Unity. Obviously, it's the product that you launched 18 months or so ago now, I think, and seems to be going really well on market. Love to learn a bit more about it, how brands can engage with Telegraph Unity, what kind of things can they do with it, what makes it unique in market. It'd be great if you could share a bit more information about that.
Wonderful, thank you. So so we started working with InfoSum, I think it must have been 18 months ago, is that right?
It feels about right, just before lockdown, I think.
Yes, it was. And last year was really the year of a sort of suite of products that we call Telegraph One. So that was our big focus commercially last year, and that was all about bringing together all of our first-party data and insight, and as part of that, looking at where the gaps were and what products we wanted to be building out next. So this time last year, actually, it was only last summer. It was in the middle of that kind of weird non-lockdown that we had for about 6 weeks. We launched Unity, and it was the same time as we turned off the use of any third-party data for targeting. So we made an announcement saying we're only using first-party data now, and launched Unity at the same time. So what Unity is just our brand name for InfoSum. Actually, we'd launched the product about 3 months earlier, but it took us about 3 months. Camilla Child, who's our amazing director of data strategy, and me, took us about 3 months to realise that when we were talking to the sales team and clients about our brilliant data matching product, that it'd be better if we gave it a name and a logo. And so
Brilliant.
After about 3 months of going, why isn't this not catchy? We launched Unity, and it really did make a difference. It just shows the benefit of product marketing.
Yep.
But essentially what Unity was doing was solving our question about how we could build a future with brands that was based on our mutual first-party data, but didn't require anyone to do anything that would make us nervous in terms of security and privacy, or would make our customers, our readers or the brand's customers nervous if they knew about it. So the prerequisite was this has to be absolutely secure, and we don't want to share any data. We don't want to share hashed emails. We don't want to share anything, because the securest way of looking after our customer data is just not to do any of that. So we had quite a hard rule about that.
Yep.
And what we liked about the InfoSum product was the fact that everyone can upload their data into bunkers. And I think we've had meetings, Stu, where everyone said bunkers about 15 times, which all started feeling a bit surreal.
Sorry about that.
I'm not sure if I'm saying bunkers or bonkers after all, but is that both parties, and it doesn't have to be just two parties, it could be more, but both parties upload their data into bunkers. And then there's this idea of the deliberate error that's introduced, which makes us feel very secure and the client feel very secure that there can be no reverse engineering. There's no potential of a data breach. And we know this because I think in one of our early tests with InfoSum, we uploaded data into a bunker and then had trouble manipulating some of the data. And somebody kind from InfoSum had to come into our offices and look over Camilla's shoulder in order to help us. So it was a really nice test to know there is absolutely no way. And we've had a lot of our most scrupulous product people kick the tires, and we know it's absolutely 100% secure.
Yep.
But then what happens is there's a matches run, and that gives us what we think of like an X-ray of that data. So it's not comparing or mixing actual data sets, but gives us an understanding of the crossover between those two sets. And from there, there's a load of really interesting stuff that we can do. So the first one is that we can match data sets, and we can understand how a pool of mutual customers with a brand change over time. We can understand the volume of our match data, and we can understand the value of it, of those customers to a brand. And then that becomes a very robust seed data set for modelling. So it's the best and most effective seed data set for modelling we've ever seen. And I can give you an example of this, which is when we ran an early campaign with a big advertiser the end of last year.
Yep.
Our trade marketing director, I hope doesn't mind me saying, was alarmed, I'd say, at the size of the activation that we were launching with, because he was I thought this was going to give us enormous scale. I thought this was going to be, I thought this was going to deliver this. And for a moment, I was a bit like, oh yes, this feels a little bit nerve wracking, because it was a smaller activation than we'd be used to. But the results of that test was so effective. It was 5 to 6 times the benchmark of what we'd normally see, which we consider to be effective as is. And it just blew everything else we'd ever done out of the water. So we started to understand that the scale of activation isn't what's important, it's the quality and that effectiveness. The other use case which we have run is suppression. So for clients who want to acquire new customers and suppress their existing ones, then it's a very neat and hugely accurate way of doing that. But as I talked about before, probably the most exciting one for us that we're starting to really build out different use cases for now is insights, because I don't think we realised until lockdown the value of the insights that publishers have
Yep.
on the same customers that brands understand, but maybe only from a transactional perspective.
Yep.
So that's we've added a fourth use case, but then you can almost go down rabbit holes because there are so many different ways of cutting that up, and so many different ways depending on what the client wants to do. So I think the answer to how to work with us is just to brief us with a real challenge, a real business challenge. And let us figure that out and work with a brand on it. And we're still at the point where we're sort of bucketing different use cases and understanding how they work. So it's a really good time to, I suppose, be able to experiment together.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense, and it's great to see. I mean, we're clearly happy that the technology is being used, but it's great to see that there's so many applications to it and so many different ways of working and creating value, whether that's proactive targeting, but really super focused and delivering great results. If that's just about creating contextual buys that are more effective because you're not showing ads to customers, or finding new ways of creating value from the knowledge that you have. It's great to see, and speaks to the great work you've done in building that audience and having that knowledge available, and then investing and engaging with technologies that can help you make the most of it. So So I'm really pleased to see it succeeding, and great to hear you talk about it. So thank you. I'm going to throw a few quick fire questions at you, if that's okay. People obviously like to know more, some stuff about you as well as the products that you're out there selling. So I've just got a half a dozen or so quick fire questions. Hopefully some nice short answers. So let me just rattle off a few to you and see how we get on. So first of all, what's your earliest memory of advertising?
I think 80s Levi's ads, probably because of Nick Coleman.
Brilliant. Love
really
those.
Great soundtracks.
Yep.
I was a nerd who was subscribing to Campaign when I was 15 or 16 because advertising in the 80s was that great.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm definitely a child of the 80s as well, and I agree with you wholeheartedly with that. We're showing our age now, but we shouldn't say that. What was your first job in publishing or advertising?
It was on a magazine called Creative Review at Centaur Publishing, which was great actually because it was all about commercial creativity. So I got to watch lots of great ads while I was there.
Brilliant. And knowing what you know now, and clearly you're very knowledgeable now, what would you say to your kind of young self back then when you were first starting? What advice would you give?
Stop worrying. I worried all the time.
Yeah, I think we can all definitely give that kind of feedback to ourselves, can't we? What is it that you love about the industry that you're in? You can say nothing, by the way, but that's...
I think the people. I tried to be an accountant once when I was right at the start of my career, and I couldn't stand working in isolation in a quiet room. So I love the chaos, the teams, the clients we work with.
Yep.
And just it's still really people-based industry. I think lockdowns proved that more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question is definitely aimed at the industry, not general life. But what keeps you awake at night?
Loose ends and the stuff that's not done yet. I think so. I'm always struggling to get to a place where my to-do list is complete, and that has never ever happened, and I don't think it ever will.
Do you have a to-do list of to-do lists? That's the meta place you need to reach. Yeah, I'm there.
I'll ask you advice on that.
and the flip side of that question is, what gets you kind of motivated in the morning? What makes you kind of want to get up and get on with work?
If I was being really pompous about it, like the high ideal of what we're doing, I think is we're figuring out the commercial model for premium publishers going forward, and we think that really matters to society, that regulated journalism is monetized. So that's the why.
Yeah, brilliant. And last quick fire question: if you were to pick a song that was the soundtrack of your life, what would it be?
I think the one that I thought about this, and the only one that really comes to mind over and over. Well, the first one was Mr. Brightside, but that's a horrible song about jealousy, so it's not that. I think La Vie en Rose by Louis Armstrong, because I think belief and optimism make things happen, and there's nothing wrong with rose-tinted glasses.
Brilliant, love that. Glass is always half full. Fabulous, thank you. All that really remains to me is to ask you one more question, which I'll do in a moment. But first of all, to say thank you. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Always love speaking to you. It's always a great journey of knowledge and fun and interest. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing with our listeners as well. Final question from me. This podcast is all about individuals who have kind of pioneered and been at the forefront of the industry, particularly around the use of data within the industry, and you're definitely one of those. Who would you like to nominate for one of our upcoming episodes?
Lara Islan at ITV. Because brains, clarity, she's a fantastic human being, and she just really wants to make things better.
Brilliant.
So I was going to have two, but Lara's my first pick. Fabulous.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate talking to you today, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, Stu. Thanks so much.
That was awesome. Thank you, Karen, for joining us on Identity Architects. It was truly fascinating to hear how the Telegraph is paving a way forward in a first-party, cookieless world that prioritizes the privacy of consumers. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you enjoy podcasts to find out when the next episode of Identity Architects drops. But until then, thanks for listening.